Welcome back to the lab. Let's talk about our first experiment. So our first kit experiment is going to be our exploring chemical and physical changes experiment. All right, before I get started, I need to make sure I have all of my supplies. All right, so I've printed the lab protocol. In the lab protocol, I have a whole listing of things that I need. There's materials in the materials kit, stuff from the equipment kit, items from the 2 chemical kits, and then some supplemental items as well. All right, so this is going to ask me to retrieve from my kit the Exploring Physical and Chemical Changes experiment. Again, remember, you have PPE in your kit. I've got my own PPE on, so I'm gonna set this off to the side. Okay, so here is my equipment kit. Okay, there's my single replacement. Oh, there's my chemical set 2. I'll need things out of that. Here's my Exploring Physical and Chemical Changes. I'll need that. And then I do need stuff from chemical set 1. So from chemical set 1, it says I need the red and blue food coloring. So I'll go ahead and retrieve the red and blue food coloring from my package. All right, so I'll open up my food coloring. All right, and we'll retrieve our food coloring here. This is the only thing we need from this bag, so rather than pull the whole bag out, I'm just going to go ahead and grab my yellow food coloring and my blue food coloring. Okay, and then I can put the rest of this away for the moment, throw my trash away. Okay, I'm gonna get this out of my way, off my work area. Okay, it says that I need my test tubes. All right, so there's my test tubes and my handy test tube rack. Okay, it says I need the 10 milliliter graduated cylinder, so we'll go ahead and open that one up. Okay, there's my 10 mil graduated cylinder. We're going to need the thermometer, the tea candle, the forceps. It says we're going to need 2 plastic cups. I'm gonna recommend you grab a third one, and I'll explain why in just a moment. So I'm gonna put 3 plastic cups to the side. It says I need 2 of the medicine cups. We'll put that to the side. We'll need the electronic balance. So we'll go ahead and open that up for good this time. Okay, so we'll take out our balance. Remember, it's going to come without the batteries put in it, so you'll need to open it up and you'll need to put the batteries in. So the setup, each subsequent time will be a little bit different. This time, you have all the initial setup that you'll need to do. So I'll go ahead and put the batteries into my balance. So the 2 sides come off. So 1 battery in one side, 1 battery in the other side, and then to use the balance, I take the cover off. Okay? All right, so I've got my balance. Okay. Then it says that I need the ruler, I need the beaker, and I need some of my weigh boats. Okay, these should be taped together, so you'll need to untape them. Okay. Tape could be pretty strong. So what I would recommend is using the first one kind of as a wash, 4 and 5, because it'll have tape residue all over it. All right, and then it does not say to get the grease pencil, but I would get the grease pencil because you might need to label things throughout your experiment. Okay, so everything we're not using, I'm going to go ahead and put back into my equipment bag. Okay, I have removed my lab kit from the cardboard plastic or packing box, and I put it into a plastic tub. All right, so I've got all of that equipment. Okay, it also tells me that I'm going to need from the chemical set 2, I'm going to need my copper 2 sulfate. my sodium hydroxide, okay, my hydrochloric acid, my phenolphthalein, and the magnesium ribbon. Oh, I basically need the whole chemical set too. Okay, now keep in mind this chemical set too, this equipment. These are things that you are going to use and reuse throughout the entire semester. So you might not use this entire bottle of copper 2 sulfate today. So make sure that you set aside what you've finished. Put it back in your kit because you will need the rest of it. Same thing, the magnesium ribbon. You're only going to use a small portion of it for this experiment. So don't throw away what you don't use. Make sure anything you don't use goes back into your lab kit when you are finished. Okay, it tells you that you're going to need your distilled water. So there's my jug of distilled water. You need some sugar. This is a common item for these. So I got a little plastic container out of my kitchen. I labeled it sugar, and then I'm gonna keep this with my lab kit. Same thing with table salt. It says you will need some table salt. So again, very common in these lab kits to need some table salt. So I just poured out some salt from my kitchen, put it in a container, label it. I'm going to keep it with my lab kit. It also tells you need matches. All right, what I've got out here is I've got a lighter. You need some sandpaper. You need some ice cubes. So I got some ice cubes out of our ice maker. Okay. We also recommend that you have a paper towel and a small plate. What I've done is I actually have some lab rags. Okay, paper towels are good to have, but I also keep some lab rags out here that I purchased just for the use of these experiments. All right, so here's from my my material set. I've got my sodium polyacrylate. I've got my sodium carbonate. Got my little dish. And I have my iron nail. Okay, so what I want to do is make sure that my work area is set up so that I can get to what I need without making a giant mess. Okay, and now that I'm beginning to work, I'm going to go ahead and put on my gloves. Okay, so that I'm safe. Now, when I printed my experimental protocol, I've got all of the activity directions, and then I have data tables and some pages for notes. Okay, as you're taking your data down, you need to not just note what's on the table, but you need to take good observations. One limitation of this particular data table is there's not a whole lot of space for observations. So those notes pages that you have on the other side of the data tables, those are really good for taking supplemental observations down. So I'm going to start with activity 1. All right, so I'm going to write on my notes page in ink. We always take data in ink, not in pencil. I'm going to write activity 1. I'm going to underline it so that I can keep track of it, okay? So now, as I do activity 1, I'm going to note what I'm asked to note on the data table, but then as I do the experiment, as I observe things, I'm going to mark down my observations in that activity 1 spot. At the end of the experiment, you'll be filling out some stuff on Canvas, and you will be imaging all of these pages and uploading those so that I can see all the data that you took during your experiment as well, okay? All right, I'm not going to go through all, 12 activities here. I'm just going to start and show you to begin with how we're going to go ahead and perform these experiments so that way you have an idea of how to use some of these pieces of equipment in your lab kit. You know, at this stage of the game, this is a preparatory class, so you may have had some laboratory science elsewhere in college. You may have had some laboratory science in high school, or this may be your first experience with laboratory science. Okay, so it's going to ask you to place test tubes in the test tube rack. So I've got my test tubes in my test tube rack. It says to place 2 of them. I went ahead and just set up all 5 of mine. Okay, it asks you, using the 10 ml graduated cylinder, to add 2 mils of the 1 molar hydrochloric acid to one of the tubes. All right, so I'm going to look at my bottles. There's my sodium hydroxide, there's my phenolphthalein. Here's my hydrochloric acid, okay? So I'm gonna unscrew, and I am going to add, drop-wise, 2 mils. Now, recall our week 2 discussion. In our week 2 discussion, I posted a video about how to read various different equipment in the lab, right? Okay, so remember with graduated cylinders, we have to read them eye level. So I'm gonna kneel down and I'm gonna go ahead and add in my hydrochloric acid here until I get it to that 2 mil mark. As I get closer to the 2 mil mark, I'm gonna slow down my drops so that I get that meniscus right at eye level. You guys are working in plastic graduated cylinders, so the meniscus actually is not as well defined in a plastic graduated cylinder as it is in a glass graduated cylinder. In the glass graduated cylinder, there's more interaction between what's in your solution and the sides of the glassware. You don't get that quite as much in the plastic, so you may see a flatter top to it than the meniscus that's drawn in the picture in the lecture. Okay, so I took my 2 mils, okay, and it tells me to add this to one of the test tubes. So I'm going to take my test tube, I'm going to take this, and I'm going to carefully pour into my test tube. Now I'm gonna replace my test tube in there. Now I don't wanna mix this up, so I'm gonna take my grease pencil. Grease pencils you can write with and they rub right off. Okay, and I'm gonna put HCl, okay? Not the best handwriting, but it's labeled. I can tell what I wrote, and I will replace that, okay? And then your grease pencil actually can go in the back of your test tube rack like that, okay? Your thermometer also, okay, if you don't have a place to store your thermometer, your instructions will tell you to wrap a rubber band around it so that it doesn't roll off. You can actually put it in the back of your test tube rack as well. That'll hold on to your thermometer really well. Okay, all right. I'm gonna save this because when I'm all done, I'm gonna store my thermometer back in this little plastic case. Okay, so now it says to rinse the graduated cylinder 3 times with your bottled water. This is why I had you get an extra cup out. If you are not working right next to a sink, it's really good to have an extra cup. I'm gonna label this cup waste. Okay, and so as I'm working, I can pull my waste into this cup. Okay, I have a nice little wash bottle for my deionized water. You may need to use even a third or a 4th cup to do this. When you rinse this, it says to rinse it 3 times. We're not gonna fill it all the way up 3 times. I'm gonna take just a little bit of my water, okay? I'm gonna swirl it around. I'm gonna pour it out into my waste. Again, I'm gonna take just a little bit of my water. I'm gonna swirl it around. I'm gonna pour it out into my waste. And again, I'm gonna take a little bit of my water. I'm going to swirl it around, put it into my waste. There's my rinse 3 times. Now I'm gonna put my waste container off to the side, my water off to the side so that it is out of my way. And I'm going to continue on with my experiment. Okay. Now the next thing it asks me to do is to add 2 mils of the 1 molar sodium carbonate solution. Okay, so I'm gonna look at my bottles. There's my sodium carbonate. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to crouch down and I'm going to add until I get to that 2 mil mark. As I get closer to the 2 mil mark, I'm gonna slow down my additions so that I make sure that I get 2 mils and not more than I need. Okay, all right. I've done my 2 mils. Now I can set my sodium carbonate off to the side. This says to add this to the 2nd test tube. Okay, so I'm gonna add this to the 2nd test tube. All right, now it asks me to record the color of the contents of each test tube in the data table. All right, so I'm gonna flip over and into my data table, color of initial items. So I'm going to write HCl for the hydrochloric acid. It is clear and colorless. Okay, and then for the sodium carbonate, same thing. Okay, any observations I've noticed so far, I can start adding to that spot in my observations log. All right, now, what does it ask us to do? All right, we've recorded the color of the contents. Now it wants us to measure the temperature of the hydrochloric acid. So I'm going to take my thermometer into the test tube that I put the hydrochloric acid. I'm going to put the thermometer. All right, if everything's been sitting at room temperature, your thermometer shouldn't change a whole lot, but you want to go ahead and leave that in there for somewhere between 3 and 5 minutes, just to make sure that there isn't any temperature difference. After that, you'll want to go ahead and read the thermometer. Again, remember, thermometers were discussed in our measurements activity on our discussion board. So I can take this and I can look at, I'm not going to wait 3 to 5 minutes. I don't think you want to sit here and watch a video, just count down 3 to 5 minutes. So let's pretend 3 to 5 minutes has passed, and I'm going to go ahead and read my thermometer. My thermometer out here in my garage is actually at about 29.0 degrees. Okay, so my initial temp, 29.0 degrees. Okay, I don't need to write degrees Celsius on there because if you notice at the top of the data table, it says initial temp degrees Celsius. So that says that everything in that column will be in degrees Celsius. All right, how are we doing? Okay, so we've measured the temperature and we're gonna repeat step 6. Step 6 is the temperature. Now, I don't wanna contaminate my solution. So I'm gonna take my thermometer and I'm going to rinse down my thermometer before I put it in the sodium carbonate. Okay, and then I'm going to dry it off my towel there. And now I'm going to put it in the sodium carbonate. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to let it sit there for a couple minutes. And then on my data table, I'm going to write down my initial temperature. All right. Says to combine. All right, so we're gonna take the thermometer out. I'll lay that down. Combine our hydrochloric acid from our first test tube with sodium carbonate of the second test tube. Okay, it's better to add the hydrochloric acid into the sodium carbonate. So I'm gonna pour that, and stuff is happening. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and record what it asks you to. It wants me to record the temperature. So I'm going to put that in there. Okay, the temperature should change. I'll record that temperature and then observe for 1 minute, record the final color and any additional observations. All right, so I'll be able to record my final temperature, my observations. Again, there's not a lot of room to write on this, so I would do some supplemental observations on that back page there. Okay, when you've recorded all your observations, you will need to reset for your next experiment. Okay, so I'm going to take that waste container. I'm going to rinse off my thermometer and dry it. Okay, I'm going to pour out what's in the test tube. Again, not filling the whole thing up. I'm just gonna rinse once, twice, and then my third time. All right, I'm going to do that with my other test tube. I've already poured this one out, so this one I just need to rinse. So I'll rinse it once, twice, thrice. All right, this one I wrote on, so I'm gonna take my rag and I am going to rub that off. It's a grease pencil, it comes right off. You can see there's nothing left marked on there. All right, and then I'm gonna rinse my graduated cylinder. Okay, rinse it, and then rinse it again. All right, okay, still have my waste container. Still have plenty of room in it, so I can set that off to the side and I can keep going. All right, and so you'll continue to go through all of these different things that you are asked to do throughout your experiment. All right, so it's going to ask you at some places to go ahead and weigh some stuff out. So to do that, I'm going to take my little balance. I'm going to set it in front of me on a nice level surface. I'm going to hit on. I'm going to let it take a moment. I'm going to look at the readout and I'm going to make sure that the readout says grams. So notice how up on that little thing there it says G, that's in grams. If it doesn't say grams, you can hit the mode button until you get to grams, because this will actually measure in ounces, another unit, another unit, another unit, another unit, and then grams. So it takes like 5 different units, okay? To weigh out a substance, what I will do is I will take my weigh boat and I will put it on my balance. Now my weigh boat, it says that I have 2.7 grams. Well, if I need, let's say 2 grams of sodium chloride, what I can do is I can hit the tare button. Now my balance will read 0. Okay, so I'm gonna pick this up and I will show you. Okay, my balance reads 0. Okay, because I hit that tare button. So what that tare button does is it subtracts out the mass of the weigh boat. It's very convenient. And so now I can measure out my sodium chloride. Now, one thing it didn't tell you to get that you may need if you are measuring out solids is you may need to, out of your equipment bag, get a spoon, okay? And so now I can take this and I can carefully add some sodium chloride until I get to my 2 grams or whatever it's asking for, okay? This balance will read out to 2 decimal places. So it's not the best balance, but it's fine for at-home use. All right, and I'll recap that. Again, we're gonna use sodium chloride and sugar fairly readily or frequently, so you might wanna keep that at hand. Okay, I used my spoon. I don't wanna cross-contaminate, so I'm gonna rinse my spoon off. Okay. Dry it there. And now I'm ready to do whatever my next solid is. When you go to pour this in, let's say you need to pour this into a test tube. Okay, these boats will pinch so you can make a little funnel and then it'll pour nicely out. If you have a bunch of solid that's left all over, you can rinse that into your test tube. Okay, and then you can rinse these and dry them and continue to reuse them. All right, so you will go through all of these activities, performing each of the steps prescribed, taking your observations, and then throughout all of this, you will be deciding if you are observing a physical change or a chemical change. When you're all done, you'll want to get whatever your storage box is, and you will want to replace all of your equipment. So I'm gonna zero my balance back out and turn it off. I'll take my little cover and I'll put it back on there. Okay. Now, once you start using all of your stuff, it may not fit quite the same way it did to begin with. So you may need to, throughout the course of the semester, figure out the best way to store all the things in whatever box you're storing it in. That way you have it at hand and you can get out what you need. Okay, when you're done with your waste beaker, you'll dispose of whatever's in the waste beaker as prescribed in the lab manual. You'll rinse out the waste container. You can dry it or you can let it air dry until the next session. You'll wipe off whatever you've written on it, and then again, you can continue to reuse it. Like I said, any extra magnesium ribbon or solutions, etc., will just go straight back into your kit so that you can use it the next time that an experiment protocol calls for it. All right, so that's how we're going to do our experiment 1, exploring our chemical and physical changes. I hope you have fun with it. There's a lot of different activities that you get to do, a lot of different things that you'll get to observe. So this is a neat one that has a lot of different pieces to it where you get to see in action the stuff that we talk about in lecture. So I hope you have fun with it.